Welcome to the Morning Scoop for Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. Ohio State football players are back on campus. It is just a little bit closer to the start of college football season. We were at the WAC for a good part of the day yesterday, shooting photos of players coming and going and watching the Ohio State football program sort of come back to life, which was honestly a little bit fun and also a little bit hot. We will talk about that on the episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast with Tony Gerdeman that drops a little later today. But first, we're joined by Alex Gleitman. We're going to be talking a little bit of recruiting this morning. Alex, before we get started on the class of 2021, can you just give people who might not be familiar with you just a little bit of background with your history working in recruiting?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, Tom. And I think I'm probably the only person on staff. I have to think about this. I've been now on three big different Ohio State sites before coming to the Scoop. But I first started actually when I was a student. It was going into my senior year back in summer of 2008. My friends and I started a blog called dottingthei.com. And I was the recruiting guy. There was four of us. We each had kind of a different responsibility. I always loved recruiting. So I kind of took the reins there, and we had things rolling a little bit. We were picking up traction. We were picking up an audience. We were doing some cool interviews and content. But then summer hit. This was spring, and then summer hit. And then as summer hit, my friends decided they wanted to have fun in the summer and not run a blog. But I kept it going and going. And coming out of the summer, I think it was Jason Priestis at 11 Warriors reached out to me and said, "Do you want to come on board here? Seems like you're kind of carrying the whole thing on your shoulders over there." So I did that, went over to 11 Warriors, helped it was still in its infancy back then. So from around 2008, fall of 2008 till sometime, I would say it was, I think, March of 2013, I was with 11 Warriors as the main recruiting guy and watched that site get to go, which was awesome. And then from there had the opportunity to jump over to Bucknuts, of course, then bought by 24/7 a couple years later. So I was with Bucknuts and 24/7, doing recruiting and team stuff from 2013 till December of 2018, and then took a little bit of time off. Had my son in early February of 2019. Took about 6 months off, 7 months, something like that, and then ended up joining over at Buckeye Grove and Rivals, where obviously I worked with Ken and Nevada and Mark, and so had been there almost a year before this opportunity came. And for me, it's pretty cool, as I said, working at 11 Warriors, working at 24/7 and Bucknuts, where I got to work with Bill Green, and then working at Rivals with Ken, Nevada, Kirk, Ross. I also worked with Ross at 11 Warriors, so cross paths twice and now three times. So for me, been covering recruiting a long time now, 12 years or so, and this opportunity was awesome to kind of join forces with some of the guys I've worked with, I've been friends with in the past, I've gone head-to-head with in the past, but it's pretty cool for all of us to kind of team up and give Buckeye fans what I think is the best coverage overall and definitely the best recruiting coverage they're going to get anywhere.
Buckeye Scoop has only been up for less than a week, and there's already been quite a bit of recruiting intrigue on the site. The news about J.C. Lathan broke, was it late Thursday or late Friday night, late Saturday night?
Saturday night, yeah.
Saturday night, yeah. He was looking for an edit and was ready to commit. And then the question was, okay, but where? And everyone's experts seem to be saying, I'm not sure, but I don't think it's here. And the Alabama people didn't think it was going to be Alabama, and the LSU people didn't think it was going to be LSU, and the Ohio State people weren't so sure it was going to be Ohio State. Can you kind of walk us through that whole process and that sort of intriguing evening that sort of played out on the insider board at BuckeyeScoop.com and where the Lathan situation sits right now?
Yeah, it was certainly interesting because I think throughout the whole quarantine, a lot of people felt that if he made a decision, JC originally was saying he's going to take his visits no matter what. He was supposed to do that in April and then come to a decision. Obviously, because of the pandemic and the ban on recruiting activity, that didn't happen. But he had always said that he was going to wait to take his visits. Now the ban is through July, and August probably isn't. There's probably not going to be any visits in August, so we're probably looking at September at the earliest. So when there started to be talk of J.C. Lathan possibly moving up his timeline, I think a lot of people, including myself, thought it was going to favor Ohio State because he has been to Ohio State. Ohio State's been the longtime favorite, and so he's been to LSU, but I don't think he's been to Alabama. And so a lot of people said, well, if he doesn't have the chance to visit those other schools again, and Ohio State has such a big lead, it's got to be Ohio State, right? But I think there's some things at play here that a lot of people didn't realize, and I'm going to go into this. You'll see here in the next, depending on, I guess, when you listen to the Scoop, it's going to be shortly after the Scoop's release. I'm going to release my second edition of my weekly recruiting feature called A-Deck, and it's completely devoted to J.C. Lathan and my final call. But there was a lot of dynamics here that I think shifted this thing over the last couple months. One of the main ones being that J.C.'s been living with his mom most recently during the pandemic. I think his parents are separated. His dad lives in Milwaukee. His mom lives in Chicago. He goes to IMG Academy. So they hadn't been together for a lot of time, but obviously he went home from IMG during the pandemic. I think dad is a big Ohio State I don't want to say fan, but I think he really favors Ohio State in this thing. And he also was someone who is trying to push visits, make sure JC takes that round of visits to make sure he's making, the best decision, not a decision on a whim, not a decision because of what's going on in the world. So I think that was that situation. But now JC living with mom, I think, not that she has anything against Ohio State, but I think she favors Alabama. I think she's fine with him not taking all of his visits. I know Evan Neal, who's an IMG Academy product, started as a freshman last year for the Crimson Tide. Definitely looking like he's going to be the next first-round pick out of there. I know he's been in JC's ear. I know Alabama's history and track record of producing first-round offensive linemen certainly has caught JC's eye the same way that a defensive lineman or a defensive back might look at Ohio State and say, wow, I got to go there. They really know how to develop me in my position. So I think all those three things combined have led to a shift in Alabama surging over the last couple of months. And again, I have some really good inside stuff in A-Deck. If you're a subscriber, absolutely check it out shortly. If you're not a subscriber, definitely recommend you giving us a try, at least for a month, and checking that out. But I go really deep into what my final pick is, and not only what it is, because I'll say it on here, it's Alabama. I think J.C. Latham's going to commit to Alabama sometime either today, tomorrow, or Thursday. But I really go into the why and how this thing may have gotten away from Ohio State. But that's where I have it right now. A little long-winded, I know, but wanted to kind of give you the full scope of everything. And I do think this is a situation where Ohio State will continue to chase him until he signs. Hope to get him on an official visit if he does end up going through with a commitment to Alabama and try to flip it in their direction. But, this thing could change a lot between now and the time he announces. So kind of hold on to your hats. We'll see what happens.
If Lathan does end up with Alabama or somewhere else that is not Ohio State, where do the Buckeyes turn next on the offensive line? For people who don't know, Lathan is an offensive tackle prospect, ranked one of the top 5 players in the country overall by 247. Truly an elite tackle prospect. Where do the Buckeyes turn next if he doesn't end up going with the Buckeyes?
Yeah, that's tough, and I honestly don't think Ohio State knows for sure. There's a lot of guys on the board. They definitely, I think, want to bring in 2 more offensive linemen. Jagger Burton is another guy, Ohio State or Kentucky, but he's more of a guard. Rocco Spindler is another guy on their board. I wrote an article on him for the site last week. That's a free article. You guys could all check it out. But he's another guy on their board, but I think that's one that's probably going to Notre Dame or Michigan. Garrett Dellinger, he's a kid who could commit soon. I have LSU as my pick right now, but I know Greg Stajuara has been talking frequently to Garrett. He's from Michigan, so obviously proximity, location. Who knows if Ohio State starts pushing a little bit harder now that they may not get J.C. Latham. Maybe they can turn that thing in their favor. I'm trying to think. Noah Josie down in the Nashville area. I think Georgia's the favorite right now, but he's a kid who they've kind of been keeping hot. And then there's a couple guys in Will Griffin and Rayshawn Benny, who I think are kind of more fallback options at this point. But those are probably the names on the board. There's guys like Nolan Rucci and Tristan Lee, who I think are long shots. They're definitely on the board, but I don't think anyone expects them to end up at Ohio State. But, I think with whenever the pandemic ends and or I shouldn't say ends, but at least dies down a little bit and recruiting opens back up and people could take visits, I think you're going to see Ohio State out on the road evaluating a lot of offensive linemen, checking out senior year film, hosting guys on visits, guys who are committed elsewhere that kind of just locked in a spot during this whole thing. Maybe they want to take some visits, and that's an opportunity for Ohio State to kind of almost reset their board a little bit and try to get some uncommitted guys and try to get some currently committed guys on visits and go from there. But I think it's too early to tell for sure who the best candidates are, because I don't even think Ohio State knows that for sure.
One recruitment that sounds maybe a little more promising for the Buckeyes than Lathan is Ty Malone. He's a defensive end from New Jersey. And Alex, that is Alex's backyard. Alex is a Northeast guy, and got a chance to talk to Ty Malone's high school coach pretty recently. That was one of the first pieces that went up on Buckeye Scoop last week, and uncovered some really interesting history between Ty Malone's high school coach and Ryan Day that could end up playing some kind of a role in the decision there.
Yeah, so it was actually interesting. It was a learning experience for me, and not just everyone. And this is something I wrote in last week's A-Deck. So, those of you who are subscribers got a chance to check that out last week. But when I was talking to Vito Campanile for my story, I spoke to Ty Malone, I spoke to Vito, and I spoke to Ty's personal trainer, Leroy Thompson. And I learned two interesting things, actually. The first was that Vito was a graduate assistant at New Hampshire for a couple years while Ryan Day was the quarterback there. So their relationship goes back, 20 plus years or so at this point. And then, obviously Vito continued his coaching career. Ryan transitioned from player to coach, and their paths have crossed many times. Vito has coached some of the biggest high school programs in the state of New Jersey. His family's really big in coaching circles in New Jersey. His dad coached at Don Bosco. His brother, one of them, Nunzio, is at Rutgers. The other one, Anthony, is with the Miami Dolphins now. And the other brother, Nick, is at DePaul Catholic, another New Jersey power. So he's been around the block. He's been in a number of programs. And so Ryan's obviously recruited his players, when he's at New Hampshire, when he's at Boston College, so they've kept in touch. And I think that that's huge for Ohio State here, in the fact that he has the trust, or that Ryan Day has the trust of Ty Malone's high school coach on top of everything else. Larry Johnson, the track record, Ty having a great visit out there, all of those things. So any advantage in recruiting is a big advantage. And then you take that, and then you add the fact that the trainer, Leroy Thompson, grew up an Ohio State fan. Even though he's from New Jersey, he's liked Ohio State since he was a teenager. He played for the Columbus Destroyers, loves the city of Columbus, became friends with Alonzo Spellman while he was there, only has great things to say about Ohio State. So you have two mentors in Ty Malone's corner vouching for Ohio State, and they're not pushing him to Ohio State necessarily. There's a lot of other good programs chasing him, but to have the support of two guys that are really important, I think, in this decision when push comes to shove, I think that's a big thing for Ohio State when it comes to Ty Malone.
You can find Alex's A-Deck column on Ty Malone at BuckeyeScoop.com right now. His piece on J.C. Lathan will go up a little later today. Again, that's at BuckeyeScoop.com. One piece of good news that we have for you. Our podcasts are now on Apple Podcasts. We had a number of people asking when that was going to happen. It has now happened. You can search for Gives and the Bank. That's G-I-V-S and the Bank. That's Mark Givler and Bill the Bank Green. Their podcast is now on Apple Podcasts, as is The Morning Scoop. You can just go to Apple Podcasts and search Morning Scoop Buckeyes. That'll get you to the right spot. Then just hit the subscribe button, and this show will come right to your phone every Monday to Friday morning. Thank you again to Alex for joining us this morning. We will be back tomorrow with another edition of The Morning Scoop. Have a great day.